I think it's safe to assume that for most people, if you ask them about the Double Dragon franchise, then they heavily associate it with the NES. And it's easy to see why, because the franchise was refined and greatly expanded on that console in ways that actually dwarfed the arcade experience when it came to gameplay. However, the Double Dragon franchise was so ubiquitous at the time that it got ports to absolutely everything, and that's how we ended up with 5 Double Dragon games on the Mega Drive. So let's take a look at all of them as they were released in chronological order. Released in 1991 and developed by Quest, it is actually Double Dragon 2 The Revenge that made it to the Mega Drive first. Visually, it's not the best looking game, but it's certainly nothing offensive, but Mega Drive games should definitely look better than this in 1991. Thankfully, the game succeeds in its gameplay. Its controls are responsive and snappy, even if the actual fighting itself feels a bit tame. There's just no impact. That satisfying crunch you get from the best Mega Drive beat-em-ups is just not here. The music is also pretty poor, offering a largely forgettable soundtrack that isn't harsh on the ears, but you sure as hell won't remember it. Sound effects are thankfully a bit better, and help make the impact of your attacks feel a little more chunky. What's quite odd about the game is how stuttery it is when it has to scroll. It doesn't scroll too often, but when it does, it's pretty bad. Coming in 1992 via Software Creations, a port of the original Double Dragon has arrived, and it's had quite a nice visual upgrade compared to the port of Double Dragon 2. Unfortunately, the visuals hide the game's biggest problem, and that's the controls. Everything is so unresponsive. You press the attack buttons and a lot of the time they just don't register, despite the fact that you are definitely pressing the buttons. The fighting on the whole just feels very tame, and there's no sense of impact to your attacks. The soundtrack is also pretty bad. The instruments chosen are very abrasive, making you want to turn the music off for this one. '93 delivered us Double Dragon 3 The Rosetta Stone. Now I know the style of this one is not going to be for everyone, but once again I think the visuals have seen a nice step forward, even if at one point I activated another playable character who was bizarrely much larger than everyone else. The new feature in this game is that you can earn money to spend in shops, which helps improve your character throughout the game. The controls are thankfully much more responsive than the port of the original Double Dragon, but the combos feel like they unfold a lot slower, making the whole thing feel like a bit of a chore to play. The music continues to be an absolute assault on the ears, sounding very buzzy and annoying. The sound effects don't fare much better either, having no real oomph to help heighten the weak and imprecise combat. Later in 1993 we get Battletoads and Double Dragon The Ultimate Team, developed by Rare of all people. This crossover title mashes the two franchises together with great visuals that balance the more grounded street fighting action of Double Dragon with the cartoon lunacy of Battletoads. It's a very responsive game to play, and the combos feel great to perform and get more and more ludicrous as the game goes on. The sound effects could have used a little more heft to heighten the impact of your attacks, but that's my only complaint here. The soundtrack is unfortunately a bit unremarkable, but thankfully it's pretty inoffensive compared to the last two games. When it comes to Double Dragon beat-em-ups on the Mega Drive, this is easily the pick of the bunch. finally, it's 1994, and Leyland Interactive Media have decided to bring us Double Dragon 5 The Shadow Falls. And surprise, it's a fighting game now! Now I know this game is not held in high regard due to jumping on the fighting game bandwagon, but here's the thing. It actually feels quite good to hit guys in this one, something you can't say for a lot of the Double Dragon games on the Mega Drive. The style of this one-on-one fighter sits somewhere between Samurai Showdown and Eternal Champions, especially in the gore department, but thankfully it's not as brutally difficult as Eternal Champions. It's pretty hilarious that this game probably has the most satisfying combat of all the Double Dragon games so far, but it doesn't have the same thrill as the belt scrollers that let you encounter different scenarios and enemies, while this is just always a one-on-one fight with some jobber. Once again, the music is pretty weak but ultimately inoffensive, but the sound effects really pop and snap, which helps make the combat feel more satisfying. This is really not that bad of a game if you're happy to play a competent but uncreative fighter.
Dragon win! Dragon win!